Okay, so the goal of today's lecture is to recreate some of what we've seen scaffolding do in the past, which is give us the ability to have sort of web-based CRUD for a model or models, but to take that CRUD and put it behind a administrative login so that you could have administrative users that had full CRUD access to some data, and the regular users, if they didn't have the admin passwords, wouldn't be able to do the CRUD. So it's I think an improvement over what scaffolding offers, because scaffolding offers you some views that you could layer your own authentication over top of. But here we've built up a website that already has a few models, already has some views, and with very little coding, we're going to be able to add a whole admin dashboard for editing it. So this is really nice for websites that are effectively just content management systems, right? So something where the site is primarily read-only from a user's perspective, but from an administrative perspective, you want to be able to give one or more people the ability to add or edit or remove content. And so there's a number of these kind of administrative frameworks available for Rails. The one that I've worked with for quite some time now is ActiveAdmin. I'm also going to show you the Ruby Toolbox. The Ruby Toolbox is a website that categorizes gems in the Ruby community and gives them a rating so that you can sort of know if you could feel confident about adopting this gem into your source code. So like anytime you are bringing in a third-party dependency into your code, you have to spend a little bit of time thinking about if this is something you really want to do, because you're taking on all of that source code that may not be maintained anymore, right? A lot of open source projects are maintained initially, and then once things get difficult, once the project becomes really popular and there's thousands of issues outstanding and sometimes just one programmer behind the whole thing, well, you get burnout happening and that project might get abandoned. And so you don't ever really want to bring in an abandoned project into your project unless perhaps you're in a situation where it does exactly what you want. It's a work situation and you're willing to take on that project as something that you will then maintain as part of your day-to-day job for things like security patches and whatnot. So there sometimes could be some trade-offs where enough work has been done so that you don't have to do a certain amount of development on a thing, but then it's going to be up to you to sort of manage and maintain this thing once it gets adopted into your project. So here I've pulled up the Rails admin interfaces section for Ruby Toolbox. You can see there's a few here. ActiveAdmin has the highest rating, and the rating is determined through a few different things. The system looks at popularity, both by way of downloads of Ruby gems and the number of stars it has on GitHub, how many forks it has or how many watchers. It also looks at like when the project was initially released and when it was last active, how often pull requests are actually getting accepted. So is this an open source project where there's a number of open source contributors that are creating pull requests and actually having those being merged in to the project? Are issues that are being raised in GitHub actually being closed? And sort of like reverse dependencies. So what are the dependencies of this thing? And it also gives it a little badge. So this is a fairly high rating. It's 9.48, a long-lived project that still receives updates. That's a pretty, I would feel confident, and I still do feel confident when I build Rails websites. I use ActiveAdmin. If you look at some of these others, here's another one, Rails admin. It's another long-lived project that still receives updates. Slightly smaller score or lower score. And that might have to do with maybe the pull request acceptance rates or when the last release was, and then things quickly drop from there. Like this one, there's a warning that there's a lot of open issues. So this one might still be under development. Like it looks like it last got a push back in September, but it has a large number of open issues, which is sort of a warning sign that it's probably not getting the kind of love that it needs from whoever is maintaining it. And then things go down from there. these kind of admin builders exist across a lot of different frameworks. So if you were working in the Laravel world, there's a bunch there, including some by the sort of the core Laravel team. If you were working in the Python world, the MVC sort of choice in that world is Django, and all Django applications come with a admin backend just by default. That's just sort of what comes with a Django app. So that's part of the core project. We need to pull in ActiveAdmin. So, okay, we've done our due diligence, we've looked and we said, okay, we're happy that this can go into our project. My next step is I would go and I would look it up on GitHub, and I would probably read through the README and sort of see like how hard is this thing to bring into a project, what are the dependencies that I'm bringing in along for the ride, because with open source, everything is built on something else, right? So ActiveAdmin itself is built on Arbra and Devise and Formtastic and inherited resources, and Kaminari and Ransack. So those are a bunch of other gems that you're now bringing into your project. And again, if I was working like and doing this for a business, or if I was an employee, I would probably go and look up all of these gems as well, and maybe even their sub-dependencies to see if they had a decent rating on the Ruby Toolbox, if they were actively being maintained or whatnot. Because it really can be problematic, especially these days. Open source projects are starting to become attack vectors for hackers. So if a hacker gains commit access to a very popular open source project, they can inject like nefarious code into that project and have that code brought into all of the projects that are using that gem, or that have that gem as a dependency of a dependency of a dependency. And this actually happens fairly regularly, both in the Ruby community and in the JavaScript community. And it usually happens because open source is based on trust, right? You have sort of a set of core team members that are developing and working on the project, and sometimes a core team member may be posing as a good actor, may actually be a bad actor. And how would you know? And then they just sort of, when no one's looking, which often happens when a project starts to sort of fall under disrepair, they'll slip in some malicious code into that gem and see how many sites they can attack in that way. So some warnings before you you go ahead and bring something like this into a project. How do we do this? Okay, so there's good documentation as well. That's also something that I always look at. No need to bring a gem into a project if there's no docs, right? Here, the docs are fairly good, and we're just going to follow them step by step to bring this into our project. I'll leave my server running, and I'll go into a second terminal here. And I also need to open up my gem file. In the past, we brought in some gems that have been like development gems, so like Faker, and we scoped it to development. This is a gem that we want in all Rails modes, and so I'm going to put it here on line 33, so it's not wrapped in a group. And I'm just going to say gem. I think it's ActiveAdmin, all one word. It is. And then I also have to say this, gem devise. So this is the ActiveAdmin gem itself. Devise is an authentication gem that ActiveAdmin depends upon. It's sort of quote-unquote optional for the project, but I've never used ActiveAdmin without it because it would mean that there would be no usernames and passwords. And that's usually why I'm bringing ActiveAdmin into my website, is to bring in administrative usernames and passwords. So I need both of those things in my gem file, and then I can run a bundle install to actually bring those gems into the project. And once that is in the project, Ruby gems can add generators to Rails. So we've done Rails G for a bunch of things. We now have a new generator that is from ActiveAdmin, which is the active_admin install generator. I say active_admin install. Naming conventions aren't super standardized on ActiveAdmin, so you'll see sometimes it's ActiveAdmin all one word, and sometimes it's active_admin. This is one of the cases where we need the underscore. Running this sets up a few things, creates a few files throughout our application. We get a whole new folder in our app folder. We get a ActiveAdmin folder that we're going to be working with today. And we also get a few migrations to create the tables that ActiveAdmin wants. It wants one table for administrative users, and it wants another table for comments. And so these are going to be comments that can be associated with any model or any row of any model in your system, and they're only for the back end. So perhaps admins could have like a little comment thread around a particular row in a database table. And so I can run Rails DB migrate. And bring those into the project. It'll generate those tables for us. And now I can do a git add and a git commit installed ActiveAdmin gem and its migrations. It has also added a line to my seed script. And so if I open up that seed script, why are you not open? Strange. Just my standard seed script. It has added a line at the very bottom, which is an admin user create statement for a default username and a very insecure password of password, with a trailing modifier saying only do this in development mode, right? So that if you ran this seed script in production mode, it would not add this user. And so that's because it's sort of a known email address with a very insecure password. So it's just a little bit of caution around that. So I can either run my seed script again, or I could take this line here and just go into a Rails console and run it. And now if I ask how many admin users there are, there's one. ActiveAdmin is what is called a Rails engine. So the gem itself is like a mini version of a Rails project that gets included within your Rails project. So this is one of the few times where you actually have to restart your server if it's already running. And so I'm going to Control-C my server, and I'm going to then run Rails S again. I should be able to go back to my application. It's going to look a little weird, and we're going to fix that in a moment. It's going to look a little weird because ActiveAdmin adds in some style sheets and some JavaScript that pollutes the application as a whole, and we're going to have to sort of shuffle it off to its own little place. But for now, I'll leave that. So you can see my styling's got a little strange. But I should be able to go to /admin, and I should now be able to log in with that admin@example.com user with a password of password and get to this admin dashboard. And it gives me some details. It says like, look at this app admin dashboard RB file if you want to customize this page. I can look at the administrative users that are in the system, and I could add a new user or edit existing users. Yeah, it did. And so if we look at the routing, if we go to our config route, oh, something's wrong with my Visual Studio in that I can't double click to open things, strangely enough. But yes, it has added routes for us, two kinds of routes, devise routes, which are for the authentication, and then a whole slew of ActiveAdmin routes that it just runs by calling ActiveAdmin routes and injects them there. So it's added a bunch, and we could actually see that if we went to Rails/info, we'll see that there's a whole bunch of new ActiveAdmin and device-related routes that have been added to the system. And if I go back over here, you'll see that there's this comments table, and this gives me the ability, if I view a particular row in any table, I can add a comment to it. This user is a jerk. It's a nice little admin comment behind the scenes. That's interesting in that the comments table is doing something which we don't discuss formally in this course, is that it's a polymorphic table. It's a table that can have an association with any table rather than a specific table, which is a really, really powerful feature of Rails. So before, we've had associations that are direct foreign key associations to a specific table. With polymorphic tables, what's stored in each row is not only a foreign key, but the table that it relates to. So in that way, you can have comments on any other table in the system and still maintain a foreign key relationship to those comments. So it's a very powerful feature of the Rails framework. It's these polymorphic associations, and comments does a good job of demonstrating that. Right now, though, we don't have our other things, and the other things in our system here is we have a horse model and a breed model, and so we have to register those with ActiveAdmin, and that's simple. There's another generator for that. It's Rails generate active_admin : resource and then the model name. And so I would say in my other thing here, Rails generate active_admin : resource, and I want that for a horse model, and I want that for a breed as well. And you can see for each one of those, it's creating a file in that AppAdmin folder that was created for us. You can open those up as well. And all it's doing is an ActiveAdmin register on the model, and we're going to fill in some blanks in a moment. But we've got that in both locations: ActiveAdmin register breed, ActiveAdmin register horse. If I go back to my admin dashboard, I suddenly have a horses and a breeds section. It lists them alphabetically. There's all my breeds. I could create a new breed. It knows about my validations. This is an error that I'm going to address in a moment, but it'll know about my validations. It's got a little asterisk here telling me that this is a required field. It knows about all of my horses. It gives me the ability to view them and delete them and edit them and create new ones. Filter, very powerful sort of filtering capability. You can filter based on an association. You can filter based on columns, when the date was created and updated, all that kind of fun stuff that you might do as an administrator, and you didn't have to write any code for that. But we saw when I actually tried to go in and like create a new breed or even edit a new breed, we got an error. And the error is forbidden attributes error. And what this is that we just need to, inside of these files, whitelist the properties of this particular model that we want to be permitted to be changed. And what the tool has done for us, ActiveAdmin, is it's actually written the line for us and left it commented out, and we can just uncomment it. So ActiveAdmin, when it got installed, actually went and introspected our database and saw that a horse has a name and a breed and an age, or it might have just looked at the schema file, a number of legs and a top speed, and it's assumed that I wanted to permit all those things. So I just have to uncomment that line in each of these files, the permit params line. So I'll save that one there. I'll head over to the breed, and a breed only has a name. You don't need to do a permit params on the ID. You just the non-key properties. And once I've done that, once I've permitted those parameters, then I should be able to create a new breed of horse, the gluttonous horse. And it created it. And if I edit that and I was to like leave off the name, I can now see that the validations are actually working. The name can't be blank. I should be also able to like edit existing horses. So there's a horse named Walter Glutton, and I can make that horse belong to this new breed and update it. And if I tried to create a whole new horse, we would see again the various things being triggered in terms of validations. You can also see that it knew about the association and it fetched from the associated table all the possible breeds, and it made that drop down for me as well. So there's a lot happening here that we didn't have to code, which is great. The very first time I saw this gem, I discovered it because students in the class discovered it, and they were giggling at the back of the classroom because they thought they were getting away with something, because there was at the time quite a bit of marks associated for building an administrative dashboard for the website in the project. And they were like a little bit apprehensive as to like, were they going to get those marks because they didn't code anything. I was like, yeah, you're done. And they were like, woo! Because at that time, I don't know, there was a lot of marks for the administrative dashboard, because before ActiveAdmin existed, yeah, we had to build this ourselves. And then ever since they discovered it, I've just been using ActiveAdmin in my own work, and it's been great. So, so yeah, that's really all there is to bringing ActiveAdmin into the system. We brought it in as a gem, we ran the installer, we registered the various columns. There's a few things you got to watch out for. If you add new properties to a model, you got to go update those files in the AppAdmin folder, right? So new properties need to be added to this whitelist. Beyond that, yeah, you have an administrative dashboard. Your system already now has Devise included, and Devise is the gem that most Rails programmers use for authentication. So if you want to further add authentication to your application for something other than admin users, maybe you have regular users, you could create another Devise table and use Devise. And Devise works in a similar way in that it provides a bunch of pre-generated views for things like, and controllers for things like sign up and login and forgot password and all those kind of standard authentication things that you need for an authentication system. So any final thoughts or questions on this, bringing ActiveAdmin into a project? So there's one final thing that I need to do, which is to fix up the fact that the styling has sort of polluted the rest of the application. And that's one of the places where, if anything, because ActiveAdmin has been around for almost 10 years, it is sort of a little long in the tooth in terms of its styling. There are a few gems out there that sort of purport to be able to like change and sort of improve the styling of ActiveAdmin. I had a few students last term get those working, and they had sort of nice sort of like materialized looking dashboards, but I tried it and I wasn't able to get those gems going, and I didn't want to battle them. So yeah, so take that for what it is. There are some gems out there that will restyle it, but they don't work easily, or at least that wasn't my experience. So how do I make it so that ActiveAdmin styles don't leak into the rest of the application? Well, let's first go see why they're doing that. They're doing that because ActiveAdmin went and it put its style sheet right into the app asset style sheets folder. That folder, everything that's in there gets automatically loaded up by your Rails application. And it also put in this JavaScript folder a JavaScript file, and that all the JavaScript in this folder also gets automatically loaded. So we don't want that, and I'm not sure why ActiveAdmin, the gem, doesn't just do what I'm about to do, because there is actually a place for styling and JavaScript that belongs to a third-party dependency, and it's the vendor folder. And so what we have to do is we have to manually vendor these assets. And so there is this vendor folder here at the root of our project. And inside of that vendor folder, I have to make a new folder called assets. And inside of it, I have to make a new folder called JavaScripts plural. And style sheets plural. And then I just need to move some files around. So I'm going to go into that assets folder and I'm going to cut and paste the ActiveAdmin style sheet into my vendor assets style sheets folder. And then I'm going to go and grab the app asset JavaScripts ActiveAdmin file, and I'm going to put that into the vendor folder as well. And then I need to restart my server, and it should be fixed. So I got to go back over here, Control C, and then rerun Rails S. And then the assets should be vendored. And so if I go back to the application and reload it, this goes back to my Bulma styling. But if I go to the admin dashboard, it should still have its styling as well, and it does. So that was sort of the final step there. So if I do a git status here, I can, yeah, add -m rendered the ActiveAdmin CSS and JS assets. Cool. Okay, that's part one of today's lecture. The other thing that I wanted to show was images. That's a very common thing that you would want to do with especially a content management type system like this one, is to be able to attach images to particular database entries. So for example, a picture, or at least an optional picture, for each one of my horses. And there, over the years, have been sort of a multitude of ways of doing this. One of them is just to add a image URL column to manually put images into your app assets images folder, and then just reference them by URL. And so that is doable, but it has limitations, right? You got to do that manual work of bringing files and putting them into that folder. Users can't just upload images along with creating a new horse. You don't get any sort of automatic resizing or scaling or creating different versions of the images. So that's sort of the baseline, very simple way of adding images, but it's not very flexible. In past iterations of this course, we used to use some gems. One of the gems we used was paperclip. Used that for a while. It's brought out by Thoughtbot, which is the same company that, or the same consultancy that makes a lot of different Ruby gems. This one is now deprecated in favor of ActiveStorage, which is now the sort of the core Rails way of adding files of any type to a model. In the past, we also used something called Carrier Wave, which is another gem for adding files, and I imagine this one will probably end up getting deprecated as well, because we do have ActiveStorage. And so what sometimes happens with Rails is there is this application called Basecamp. And this is where Rails began its life. So David Hannemeyer Hansen works for Basecamp, and he created Rails to help him build the very first version of Basecamp. And so Basecamp is a Rails application, and new features of Rails often start their life as pieces of Basecamp. And once they get proven inside of the Basecamp project, they get extracted out into separate gems and then brought into Rails core. And so a lot of the newer things that have been added to Rails over the years have come from Basecamp. And ActiveStorage is one of those. And so it's a way of attaching one or many files to a record. And not only does it allow this to be done in a way where those files are being saved to disk, but it also allows you to save those files to a cloud service. Allowing file uploads on a very small, low usage site is fine if you want to use your disk. But if you want to build a really popular website that is going to scale to a lot of different users or a lot of different images, there's a chance you could fill up the hard drive that your server is running if you're just writing directly to disk. Or there's a chance that what you're deploying to has what's called an immutable file system, like a file system that you literally cannot write to. So later on in this course, we deploy to Heroku, and Heroku works on an immutable file system model in that you can use Git to push your source code up to Heroku, but at that point, you cannot write permanently to the file system anymore. You can write temporarily to the file system, but anything you write will be blown away the next time you push and you deploy, including any images you might have. So it would be nicer to save to something like Amazon's cloud service S3 or Azure or Google Cloud Storage, and ActiveStorage supports all of those things as well. So it's a really nice little system, and I used it for the first time last term, just when I was building up a project myself. And so we're just going to walk through what it looks like to add images to our horse model here. And we'll just walk through the main Rails guide. And so the very first thing we need to do, which is similar to ActiveAdmin, is to run a generator to get some database migrations in place for the various tables that ActiveStorage needs for saving data related to these images. So even though it might save the images off on a cloud service or onto disk, it still needs to save some metadata about these images into the database. So step one here from the command prompt is to run, didn't paste it, oh, there it is, Rails active_storage : install. New migration has appeared in my DB migrate folder. Take a quick peek at what it is going to do, and it's going to create two new tables for me, something called ActiveStorage blobs and something called ActiveStorage attachments. And this is why I mentioned polymorphic references earlier in association with those comments, is that an ActiveStorage attachment is also polymorphic in that you can have attachments that are associated with any of your models in your system without actually needing to put a foreign key onto those particular models. The foreign key can be stored in this attachments table and maintained as a polymorphic reference. And so I need to run these migrations. So a Rails DB migrate will let me do that. That looks good. It created the two different tables for me. I can head back to the guide. And it gives me a few little bits of information. One, it says that in the config folder, there is a storage config file called storage.yml. And so maybe it's a good idea to go peek at that. So in my config folder, there should be a storage.yml. And so it looks like it's set up for, in test mode, the service for saving these files should be local disk, and it should be in the temp storage folder. When we're just using local storage alone, which we're going to use in our development mode, it's going to be disk and stored to a file named storage or a folder named storage. And then it gives examples on how you would set up for Amazon S3 and Google and Azure. I played around with using Google last term, and I found that was really easy to do. I just needed, there was like a key file that Google Cloud Services gave me as a way of authenticating my application. And then once I put that into this, this file, I was able to save uploaded images to the Google Cloud instead of my disk. But in this case, I'm going to stick with disk-based service. And then where this actually gets used, this information, is in a Rails application. In the config folder, there's also an environments folder, which is a way of configuring how Rails operates in the 3 different environments that Rails can run in: test, development, and production. So we're running in development, and we'll see in here that the ActiveStorage service is set to local, and this key here is a reference to this key here. So eventually, if we wanted Amazon to be used, we'd uncomment this, put in our information, and then we could change this to Amazon here, and then we would suddenly be using Amazon for our storage. So that's good, no changes there necessary. It talks about various disk services, blah, blah, blah. Down below here, how do we actually attach files to records? Thank you, Jeremy. There is a little bit of markup that we can add, and it's sort of like how we do associations. Has one attachment is a thing that we can do to give a single file attachment to a particular record. I've also played around with the multiple one, where there is like a has many attached things as well. We'll just do the single for now. And so I'm going to go into my horse model, and I will just say has one attached image. I don't need to add any new columns to that horses table. All I need to do is add this annotation to my model, has one attached image. There is a slight problem, and it's not really a problem, it's just something that we're going to notice is that when we go over to here to create a new horse, there's no file picker for this. And by default, ActiveAdmin generates these forms based on what it thinks you need, and it looks to the model, and it's not ActiveStorage aware. So it doesn't automatically, you could see maybe a future version of ActiveAdmin being aware of this by seeing this annotation, but right now it doesn't know that it needs anything more than the breed, the name, the age, the number of legs, and the top speed. Okay, so now I have to make it aware of that. So I got to go back to the horses admin file. So this is the file in that app admin folder. I need to add a new permitted parameter. Even though it's not directly on my object, it's going to be passed in by the form, an image. So I have to add that to this permitted parameters as part of the whitelist. The other thing I have to do is I have to customize the form that is being created. And ActiveAdmin lets us do it by setting up a form block. And the docs for ActiveAdmin are actually really good in this way. So I'm going to go to the section for customizing the form. Is that what I want or what? I guess it is. Yeah, this is what I want. So to recreate what's already in there right now, I just need this. So it's form do, which gets past a block parameter called f. f.semantic errors is going to show errors that are validation errors. f.inputs does that sort of magical introspection and figures out all the things that need to be part of the form. And then f actions is going to give me my submit and cancel buttons. All of this is something that was not coded by the ActiveAdmin team. This is coming to us by way of yet another gem. This is a Formtastic form builder. And so that's just another gem in the Ruby ecosystem called Formtastic that lets you build up really simple gems, or sorry, really simple forms. And so with this in place, this should look the same. So when I go to create a new horse, that should be identical as to what it was before. Now I have the ability to add to it. And so what do I want to add? Well, I want to add a new collection of inputs, but I want to be in charge of what these inputs are for. I need a f input for an image. I'm guessing, I think this was it. f.image, or sorry, f.input, it's the image that I'm trying to set, and it's a file that I want, or a file picker that I want. And there it is. I've got a little browser. And this should appear for existing horses as well. And I should now be able to browse to a horse and update it. And okay, we still can't really see it yet anywhere, but it looks like things successfully worked. I can sort of poke around and see. We know that files are being stored into this storage folder. There are some things in here. Some of them are probably from past experimentation with the other section. But if I go into there, we can see there's a file. When was that created? That was created, oh, let's see for one that was created on the 30th. This one here. And I bet you if I copy and paste this and rename it to a dot thing, my horse. I'm obsessed with this picture of this horse. It comes up when you just Google for horse, which is this is not really a normal looking horse, but Google thinks it is. And so I think it is as well. All right, so there you go. So that worked. But how do I actually then display this horse? Either in the back end somehow. It'd be nice maybe on the show page to have a little thumbnail of the horse, or maybe on this list to have a little tiny thumbnail of the horse. And it would also be nice on the front of the website when we display horses, that we would see that this horse image is present. And so we go back to our ActiveAdmin docs and we see how do we actually link to files, and it looks like there's just a new helper that we can have used inside of our views called URL4, and then in our case it'll be horse.image, and we could pass that to the image tag helper. And so I'm going to go back over to Bulma, because I want to augment my card component a little bit, such that my card component has an image on top of it, which is going to be this part. So adding a div with a class of card image as the first element within my card class div. So I'm just going to copy and paste that whole little chunk there. And I'm going to visit my horse partial. So that's my underscore horse.html.erb. And I can paste that right in here. If I go back to my application, looks like that worked. But I only want that to show up if the object that I'm working with actually has an image, right? So like for these other horses that don't have images, I don't want that to be displayed. And so we could have a quick little if statement in here that says something like, if horse.image is present, then display this thing. And so that if statement will ensure that only horses with attached images will display an image. So these will all go away. But if we go back to Wally Glutton, it has room for an image. The image isn't yet being shown, but that's because I have to replace this hard-coded image tag here with a call to image tag and the URL for the horse image is what I need. Oh, look at that. So there's my horse. It did not. So that's a very good question. Did it automatically rescale it? No. It is Bulma does like responsive scaling. So it's Bulma's doing some scaling, but it's only done as a matter of the CSS. But ActiveStorage is actually capable, if what you're dealing with is an image, of doing resizing for you. You need to install a Linux tool to do that. So you need to, from the command line, do a sudo install on ImageMagick. And so ImageMagick, and it's spelled funny. Yeah, like that. Or yeah, like this. So ImageMagick has been around for a long time. It's a CLI tool for editing and resizing images of all sorts of types. So if you install ImageMagick into your Windows Linux subsystem, you can then use ActiveStorage to resize your images on upload, and it can make a whole bunch of different sizes for you. So you could say on upload, make me a thumbnail, like a medium size and a large size, and you can specify the heights and widths that work for your layout. You can specify just the width and it'll scale the height appropriately in the correct ratio. It'll do it such that I think it does the transformation on the fly and then caches it. Yeah, that is something that you'll need to look into. There's instructions here though as well. Like there's a new image gem that you have to add. I did it last term. It wasn't that bad, and it allowed for image resizing as well. Yeah. I wouldn't, just because like if like most images, especially images from like cameras these days, are going to be huge. And so if we're doing the transformation client side, then we still have to deliver the entire payload to the user, and they might be on like a mobile phone over like a slow 3G, and it'll just clog up the experience of the website. So if possible, you always want to do resizing on the server if you can. And there's even image services. So I had a few students last term that instead of doing it with ActiveStorage, they were using like a cloud service for images that handled all the resizing. as well, and I think there was a gem for that. I can't remember which cloud service they were using, but there was a pretty neat one that was handling images for them. So there are some marks available on the project for adding image uploads and also for dealing with the resizing nature. So for figuring out that whole process of installing ImageMagick, and then in terms of ActiveStorage, going through and installing the image processing gem. And then when you go to load up the image, instead of just saying URL for, you go to like user, avatar, in our case it would be horse image, and then you request a variant, and then you specify some of the resizing that you want to see. It looks like I maybe don't even need URL for when I'm using it with image tag. Let's see if this works. Yeah, that's nice. And so yeah, this would be like, you would add a variant for, and then, or variant, what was it? Variant. You just add a variant, and then you would specify sort of what kind of resizing you would want right there on the fly. And we could do the same kind of thing behind the scenes, like if we wanted to customize ActiveAdmin. And so, for example, behind the scenes here, if we wanted to customize this view here to display like a little thumbnail for the images, just like we were able to override how ActiveAdmin displays a form, you can also override how ActiveAdmin displays an index. And so, ActiveAdmin, custom index, I want index as a table. Yeah. So here I could do, yeah, this is what I want. Selectable column, a column, and then my horse has like a name. And here I would have to sort of like replicate these various things. So I won't bother with all of them, but you would have to go and replicate all of these. But then I can also put in a column for the image and get it to use the ActiveStorage image and resize it down to a small version there as well. But I won't implement that right now. But that's another thing we could do to customize the back end. I'm going to just save these changes here to Git, implemented or added attached image for horses using storage. And there we go. That's what I wanted to demonstrate today. Are there any final questions about anything really that I've gone over today in terms of ActiveAdmin or ActiveStorage in a Rails application? Right on. Well, we can just leave this image up here for one more moment. Yes. And then I will end the video.